Okay, let's dive in. Think about your day so far. How much of it have you actually spent inside?
Probably most of it, right? I mean, the estimates are kind of wild.
Yeah, something like 80, even 90% of our lives indoors. It's staggering.
And then a huge chunk of the time we are awake, and maybe not technically inside a building, we're still glued to screens.
Right, so even if you're like out, you're plugged in,
Exactly.
which brings up this really interesting first question. Could the stuff you're seeing online, the pictures you scroll past, or maybe just the plants in your office, could that be, quietly changing your brain?
Changing your memory, maybe your ability to focus.
Yeah, in ways you don't even realize.
It sounds a bit out there, maybe, but there's actually science behind it. This deep evolutionary connection we have to nature. It's called biophilia.
Biophilia, our sort of built-in pull towards life and natural things.
Right. And then there's the other side, biophobia, that really ancient, necessary fear or aversion to things in nature that were dangerous.
Like snakes or spiders for some people. Makes sense from a survival standpoint.
Absolutely. Remembering what was safe to eat versus what might eat you,
Mm.
well, that was pretty fundamental. And those responses are tangled up with emotion and memory.
Okay, so let's pause there for our second hook. We're maybe 40 seconds in. Here it is. In this world where we're just drowning in information, constant notifications, digital noise,
Yeah.
are our modern environments, these boxes we live and work in, actually making it harder to focus, harder to remember things?
Well, there's definitely research suggesting urban settings tax our attention. They demand this constant directed attention, the kind you need for, hard mental work.
And that leads to fatigue, mental burnout.
Exactly. Attentional fatigue.
So this deep dive today, we're really going to unpack what the science says. Can we leverage that nature connection, even in small ways or digitally, to get some focus back? Maybe boost our memory.
Which leads nicely to our third hook around the 90-second mark. How on earth do scientists even measure this stuff?
Right. How do you measure if looking at a tree actually changes your memory? It feels so subjective.
But they have some pretty clever methods. It's not just about asking people, how do you feel, Dan? They're using tools, putting people in actual forests versus sterile rooms, for example.
Or showing different images on websites and tracking responses really precisely.
Yeah, a big one is eye tracking. It literally shows where your eyes go second by second. That tells us about visual attention.
And it's more than just where you look, right? They're linking it to other things.
Exactly. Researchers are figuring out how to connect those eye movements to, like, your emotional state or even how hard your brain is working, your cognitive load.
We're going to look at some specific studies today, folks like Yu-Chen Liu and Jin Zhu at Monash, Amir Riaz and his team at Australian National University looking at websites, and D. Holtzman and V. Militaki at Georgetown who did work in physical spaces.
And some of the findings, backed by this kind of data, might genuinely surprise you about where you do your best thinking and what makes information actually stick.
Okay, so let's lay that foundation first. Biophilia and biophobia, it goes back to evolution, like you said.
Right. Positive feelings towards things that helped us survive food, water, shelter cues. Negative feelings towards threats, predators, poisonous things. Emotion was key.
Because if something was really important, either good or bad, you needed to remember it. Forgetting could be fatal.
Precisely. And today, two big theories help explain why nature still benefits us. First, attention restoration theory, RT.
RT, okay, tell us about that.
It suggests nature helps restore that focused, directed attention we burn through in daily life. It does this by engaging something called soft fascination.
Soft fascination, like watching clouds or leaves rustling.
Exactly. It holds your attention effortlessly, doesn't demand intense focus, unlike, say, navigating busy city streets, which constantly drains that directed attention.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. What's the second theory?
Stress recovery theory, or SRT. This one focuses more on the physiological side, how nature helps reduce stress. Often it's through triggering positive emotions.
And you mentioned earlier, emotion can come before thinking.
Yeah, some research suggests that. So feeling good in nature might actually pave the way for your brain to recover cognitively. Less stress, better thinking.
So lower stress, easier focus leads to brain recovery. Cool. How do they measure it, though, beyond just asking people?
Well, eye tracking is huge, like we said. That Lewis Zoo review really highlights it for capturing visual attention and linking it to maybe emotion or cognitive effort. Things like pupil size changing can indicate mental load.
And they also use behavioral tests, I assume, memory quizzes, creativity tasks.
Oh, yeah. Measuring performance after exposure to different environments or images. That's key. And interestingly, when they study biophilic design using eye tracking, the things they look at most are daylight and plants.
Because there are common elements people add to spaces.
Exactly, and relatively easy to study the effects of.
All right, let's get concrete. Talk about that Georgetown study by Holtzman, Malataki, and others. They did people 147 participants and put them in different places.
Yeah, 3 settings. A real forest, a specially designed biophilic room, and just a standard lab room, the control.
Okay, first off, how did the places feel to people? Subjective impressions.
The real forest scored highest on fascination, that captivating quality, and also hominess, which is interesting.
Hominess, huh? Maybe that deep evolutionary familiarity. What about the fancy biophilic room? The one with the moss wall and plants?
That one was rated highest for coherence. It felt organized, easy to grasp. But both the forest and the biophilic room were seen as much more aesthetically pleasing than the plain control room. So design nature helps, but real nature had that extra fascination, that hominess factor.
Now, here's where it gets really juicy. Creativity. They tested different kinds. Divergent thinking, like brainstorming lots of ideas, and convergent thinking, finding the one best answer.
And the results were really clear-cut for one type. Being in the real forest gave a significant boost of divergent thinking.
Really? Compared to both other rooms?
Yes, significantly better than the biophilic room and the control room. Tests measuring idea, flexibility, and novelty show this effect quite clearly.
Wow. So if you need to brainstorm, literally going out into nature might be the best bet. A biophilic room didn't quite cut it for that.
Not for divergent thinking in this study, no. But convergent thinking, finding that single solution wasn't significantly different in any of the environments.
Okay, actionable takeaway number 1. Brainstorming block. Try a walk in the park, seriously. Maybe leave the moss wall for focused work.
Now, here's a twist. Mood. You'd think the forest would be the big mood booster, right?
Yeah, definitely. Less stress.
But actually, negative feelings like anxiety went down significantly after being in the control room and the biophilic room compared to their baseline levels before the session.
Not the forest.
Not significantly during the session in this study. And positive feelings didn't change much anywhere during the test period itself.
That is weird. Any idea why? And what about focus, like working memory?
Executive functions like working memory and attention also showed no significant differences between the environments here. The researchers suggested maybe the exposure time in the forest wasn't long enough to see those effects on mood or executive function emerge strongly.
Okay, so maybe for a quick reduction in negative feelings, even a pleasant indoor space, maybe with some natural touches, can help. But for that creative spark, real nature seems special.
Right, so that's the physical world. But we live so much online now. Can these ideas, biophilia and biophobia, apply to websites, to the images we see on screens?
Let's look at that Australian National University study by Riaz, Gregor, and Lin. They had, 132 people look at simulated national park websites?
Yeah, and the key difference was the main image shown. Either something biophilic, like a cute small mammal, or something biophobic, like a snake,
Yikes.
or just neutral, like a bull. Then they tested emotional response and how well people remembered info from the site.
Okay, emotions first. Predictable.
Pretty much. The biophilic, cute animal pics. Much higher positive feelings, what they call valence, the snake pics. Significantly lower valence, more unpleasant, but also much higher arousal.
Meaning more excitement, alertness. Makes sense. Snakes tend to do that.
They do.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker, the memory results. Did the emotion actually affect recall?
This is the big one. Did it?
Yes. And this is really fascinating. The strength of the emotion, how far it was from neutral, whether it was positive or negative, that predicted better information recall.
Wait, so strong positive and strong negative feelings helped people remember the facts on the website?
Exactly, both for recognizing multiple choice answers and for freely recalling details later. That emotional intensity, regardless of flavor, seemed to tag the information.
Like an emotion tag making the memory stickier?
That's the idea. It links back to that survival mechanism. Emotionally charged events are important, so we remember them better. Interestingly, arousal helped with recognition memory, but not free recall in their specific tests.
Wow, okay. The implications are huge for anyone putting information online. Designers, educators.
Marketers, public health communicators.
Yeah.
Yeah. It suggests using images that pack an emotional punch, positive or negative, could make the information itself more memorable.
So maybe a slightly scary image for a health warning.
The researchers actually suggest that. Biophobic images for things like anti-smoking campaigns or climate change messages where you want the warning to stick. The negative jolt might help recall.
Or for a website explaining a complex health condition, maybe soothing biophilic images would help people feel calm and retain the info better.
Precisely. It's about matching the emotional tone to the goal.
So let's pull this all together. What we're seeing across these studies is that our ancient connection to nature really does matter. It's not just fluffy stuff about liking trees.
No, it measurably impacts how we feel, how creatively we can think, especially that divergent brainstorming type in real nature, and even how well we learn and remember things we see online.
The design of our spaces, physical and digital, has real cognitive effects.
Definitely. Now, we should add the caveats. The tools are still developing. That eye tracking review mentioned things like visual fatigue can affect results. Calibration isn't always perfect.
And the studies themselves have limits. The forest exposure was short in one, the websites were static in another. Controlling everything in a real forest is tricky.
Right. Research is always ongoing, refining things, but the core message seems pretty solid.
Yeah, accessing real nature seems uniquely powerful for unlocking that brainstorming ability. And online, emotion, good or bad, acts like memory glue. It taps into something fundamental.
That biophilic and biophobic wiring.
So the final thought for you, listening. Given how much time we spend in designed environments, homes, offices, websites, apps, how can you use this?
Right. Should your workspace maybe prioritize calm, biophilic vibes for focus? Or do you need easy access to the outdoors for when you need creative ideas, maybe building a walk?
And notice online, does that really striking image, even if it's a bit unpleasant, make you remember the article details better than a bland stock photo?
Think about the environments you choose, the ones you create, the ones you scroll through. They're not just background noise. They're actively shaping your mind, how you think, how you remember, probably in ways you haven't fully considered before.